Um, Matt's one of those people that I really appreciate in education because he's he's done everything, and he hasn't come in um, and gotten into something that he doesn't have a lot of background knowledge. He's been in education, I think, most of his career. He's been a teacher. He's been a principal. He is now at CISA 3. And we're just very lucky to have him come in and coaching. If you have questions along the line on coaching too, we're going to open it up toward the end for those questions and pick Matt's brain on what he feels, or if he can give his insight into that for you. So, with no further ado, I am going to turn things over to Matt. And once again, thank you all for being here. Um, boy, and with that said, I was going to throw in a joke about snow coming your way, but I won't do it. I won't be cruel. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I would push it. Did you have one more thing, Brian?
No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Brian, and thanks, Norm, and thanks for everyone for being here. Thank you to WSRA for hosting these things. I hear stories about how much time Brian, Norm, and the whole WSRA crew put into this. And Deb Cromer's here as well. And so I thank you all so much for devoting your time and energy and expertise to this. This is really important, especially with legislation that's coming around and is here and how things are changing. So WSRA is so important to be a part of our work. So this presentation's on coaching literacy. And instead of like best practices and certainties, I thought we'd just open it up to questions and considerations, and really try to just be open and curious about where we're at right now. We're just kind of, it feels like an inflection point with literacy, with how we teach readers and writers and speakers and thinkers, and just trying to find some not middle ground, but find in a more open space to have some dialogue. So again, my name's Matt Renwick. I'm a systems coach. So that's part of the EMLSS project here at the statewide, used to be the RTI Center. So I support schools in CISA 3 around response to intervention and a lot of just core instructional system practices to make sure we have more equitable outcomes for kids. So this is my first year. This is my first time actually as a instructional coach. I've written about it, talked about it, but up to this year, I've actually never been an actual coach. So this has been kind of a learning experience for me, for sure. My learning intentions for today is just seeking simplicity, not simple, but simplicity, meaning I want to keep things clean. I didn't put a ton of work into these slides, although they look fine, but I really want to keep things lo-fi, maybe, if that's the right word. But I know all of our bandwidths right now are pretty limited with so much going on, say testing and everything. So I just want to give you some food for thought, and hopefully you can walk away feeling more empowered. One thing I'm doing to practice simplicity is when I'm on my work day, like today, I'm working, right? But when I'm not working, I am not working. So I did not take my smartphone to the Mineral Point championship basketball game. Our kids go to Mineral Point. You can't see them, but they're on the bottom right. They're both in the pep band, which if I have to recommend anything, like have your kids going to pep band so you can enjoy the game without worrying that your kids are on the court. It's the perfect way to go. So, but congratulations to the Pointers. It's the first state championship for the boys. So, but I would be inviting you here too to post in the chat what your current role is, your location, your name, of course, and what's your intention for learning today. So it looks like a lot of coaches or um, in positions where they are doing a lot of coaching. So I see like literacy partner, interventionist, and you're having a number of conversations with classroom teachers, a lot of first year coaches, teaching and learning strategists, yeah, supporting tier one instruction. And Deb's intentions to be responsive to kids in the face of more and more mandates. I think we can all share in that intention. That I didn't become a reading teacher. This is my great. Well, it's great to see everyone here. I think overall we're all in positions as coaches and either big C coach or little C coach, but we are coaching colleagues in some capacity. Um, so I have some. These are the questions I'm wondering right now, and these aren't just rhetorical, looking for a response necessarily, although we are. But what is the primary function of coaching? In today's context, what is your shared definition of literacy? And what might we consider when coaching literacy within these complexities? That's going to guide this conversation today. Just in the chat, I invite you to post your belief around the purpose of coaching or the role of a coach or both. Christina's intentions to maximize outcomes. Strengthen tier one. Okay. Alongside teachers to our ability to improve student growth achievement. All right. Support teachers to the greatest extent possible so they can be effective in their classrooms. Working beside others to listen and ask questions to provoke the coach to think about options and solutions. Options. I love that word. Support teachers in delivering high quality tier one instruction. So here's a couple of definitions that we have working right now at CISA 3. So I also run the coaching network within our region, within our agency now in our region. Next year, we developed a coaching definition, which is collaborative professional growth providers and catalysts for empowering continuous learning. Our Costa and Bob Garmston say it's to produce self-directed learners and leaders with the disposition for continuous lifelong learning. I notice in these discussions and definitions, like CETA 3, we have some consultants within our coaching network. And so our definition had to be more encompassing. They do some directive types of professional development. So how you define coaching, I think, is largely based on your context. So in the chat now, let me go back to my other one. What is your shared definition of literacy? This might be a harder one. I think it is. Post your working definition of what it means to be literate. I suppose I can do this too. reading, writing, speaking, listening, read and write, communicate and learn, understand the world, communicate our ideas, making meaning, communicating a message through reading and writing, be able to understand text for a variety of purposes and communicate to others, encompassing communication. So I'm hearing a common definition of communication is a key to literacy. I was looking up some definitions of literacy, and here's a few that I found. What's interesting is a lot of the, and I won't spend too much time on the science of reading, but a lot of the organizations that promote a science of reading don't actually have a definition of literacy. They'll describe like components of teaching reading, or they'll even incorporate writing once in a while, but they don't actually have a definition of literacy. So the National Reading Panel defines reading, at least, as the ability to decode, read text fluently, know the meaning of words, and make meaning from what is read. I heard this definition, which I thought was so smart, from Nick Stone, a YA author at the Illinois Reading Council conference: the ability to position oneself in the world in relation to others. I thought that was so smart. It's just so much more empowering, and it's being literate is much more than just be able to decode text and understand it and then communicate our thoughts based on that text. It's about agency. So just something to think about as we try to define what it is we're trying to get after when we coach literacy. So think about these last two questions. What might we consider when coaching literacy within these complexities? We have directive coaching, we have facilitative coaching, we have the art of teaching readers, we have the science of reading. What should we be considering? And I invite people one more time, if you'd like to post in the chat where you're at with this. And I realize it's a big question. We'll come back to it. So here's some considerations thinking about how complex literacy is and how challenging it is to sometimes understand what coaching means when we're in these contexts. Okay, and then Deborah says we need to consider who we are, who our students are, and the context in which we teach and live. I think that's great. We must consider the children we serve in our role. It's about them first and foremost. Yep. I think it includes all, because so many are at different points in their literacy journey. So yeah, I think meeting people where they're at is a wonderful approach, teachers and kids. And so these considerations meet that challenge, I think. So the first consideration, I have 10 of them, is as a coach, prioritize trust. When I was a principal, I blocked off daily time in my calendar to get into classrooms. And I made frequent classroom visits. We called them instructional walks. And I would just walk through the building and just note and name and appreciate what was going on. I highly recommend holding off on any kind of feedback or notes if you're just getting into coaching. Really focus on establishing relationships that are personal. Until then, no notes or feedback before we try to improve instruction. Another consideration is to communicate your intentions. I've asked many coaches, like, what is the most important job of you when you get started as a coach? And it's really being clear about why you're coming in. What is your role? What is your purpose? What are the expectations that teachers should have? What are your outcomes that you expect to see? And we did this as a network in our CISA 3, is we really defined who we are as coaches. I coach to ensure all students have access to a high quality education. Go through this kind of process where you're looking at your values and your beliefs, and then convey that to the faculty and staff so they know it's safe to be able to share concerns and questions. Be real clear about that you are not an evaluator, you're not supervisor, you're not a quasi administrator. You can almost have a T chart of like, this is what the principal does and this is what the coach does. And there's some confidentiality that's going to be present when you're working with a coach. So as a coach, you can't be clear enough about this, and I would regularly do it. A third consideration is just to be present. I know I fell into this trap as a principal, especially early on. I would want to fix things that I saw. I felt like it was like a plumber walking around, right? And there's all these leaks in his classrooms, and it's such the wrong approach because I haven't established the relationships. So let go of this need to fix while we're visiting classrooms, and look at what is happening, what's going well, and use that as a starting point. Find those successes. Let people know what's going well. Some classrooms you're going to have to look kind of hard, right? I remember one classroom I had to comment on how um, aesthetically pleasing a poster was because that's what I could find that day. If you can't find something, you're not probably looking hard enough. So really start positively and separate your identity from people's interactions from you. What I've learned just from 16 years of being an administrator that my role, my position carried baggage based on previous interactions that teachers might have had with a prior principal. And it can be the same thing with coaching. They could have had just a historically negative experience with coaching. So really try to separate your identity from any kind of negative reaction they might give you, and really be curious. Remove any kind of certainty, even though it might seem, yeah, this is just not this is not what we want to see in the classrooms. Really try to put that aside and get curious and start to ask questions. Another consideration as you think about coaching literacy is sharing what you learn. So coming into classrooms from a learner perspective, I used to write a weekly newsletter about my classroom visits, and I would post it, online on a Google Doc or a newsletter tool. I started every Friday that was my goal for the day, was to get my newsletter out. I would celebrate effort, I would celebrate growth through just images and updates. This is an example of one school I'm coaching in. They have a let's talk about staff. So they have opportunities to put up testimonials and quotes from kids or from parents or just from their colleagues about what's going well. And I would end every newsletter with some kind of a professional article, podcast, or video with a summary of what that content was, just to keep the eye on the ball of we're all about professional learning. So where's your trust right now? This is an activity I'm going to invite you to do. Take a piece of paper. Something like this, just out of your printer, your copy paper. And just make a T-chart. I don't know if it'll translate it out, but on one side put person, and then the left side put like a known fact, something that you know about that person. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write down as many staff members that you know. So for each person, you're going to then write the known fact. So my wife was a part of my staff in my previous school. So I put Jody, and she likes to dance at Zuba. That's where she's at right now. So when I say go, start this process. Everyone ready? Go. You got 1 minute left. 30 seconds. And time. If you want to, put in the chat how many people you were able to list. How many people did you get to that you're able to list the name and something personal about that person? How many did you get? All right. We're seeing anywhere from 7 to 14. That's great. So you've got that list, right? Okay. So now you're going to make another list. And these are all the people you did not list on your things you know personally about them. And it's no judgment, but what I have found is coaches and administrators will tend to go where they're welcomed. I had one principal who loved to go down to the tech ed room because he and the tech ed teacher were buddies, but he never went to the English teacher's room because, you know, maybe the practices weren't as strong. And so we tend to go where we're welcomed. And what I would invite you to do is just before you start giving feedback for those people that you didn't list yet, that could be just a time thing, of course, too. Start to just chat them up. What is something you can learn about them that makes them unique? And that's just how we establish those personal relationships. And as B.G. Routman has noted, we can't have professional relationships without personal ones first. So really focus in on that. Consideration number 5 is to form an instructional leadership team. It is tough to be on your own as a coach. So really advocate with your principal to build out some kind of shared leadership, some guiding coalition where you are making shared decisions about the professional learning in your building. Read your Routman's book, Rewrite Lead, talks about interviewing interested teachers. I would highly recommend that. I wouldn't let anyone on. And look for faculty that are taking a whole school perspective. They're not there to gum up the works. They're not there to keep the status quo. They are there to fuel and promote collective learning. This is one thing we're doing in a district I'm working with. We're defining who makes which decisions. You know, so the principal makes the final decision on hiring, whereas a team, the leadership team, is going to make a decision about choosing a curriculum resource. And in fact, that's something we did a few years ago, my previous school. We made a decision to get together. Not everyone agreed with it, but everyone understood that this was the role that we served. So I know a lot of you are coaches or interventionists, and you're not in a position to form a leadership team. I would ask you to consider talking to your principal about doing one if you don't have one already formed. The 6th consideration, number 6, analyze school-wide data. So collecting, organizing not just achievement results, but also results from example surveys. How does staff feel about the school climate and culture? That's really important data. Pair that with like your demographic data. Look at subgroups. Keep looking because every school has inequities. And look at subgroups. Look at poverty, gender, race. All those groups that you're going to maybe see some disproportionality, and then hold a space for the open discussion. Having norms. This is from the National Equity Project. What are some things we can commit to make sure those conversations are safe? Consideration number 7 is commit to professional learning. Focus on practice. This was something I wasn't always successful at. I would get distracted by, we want this new literacy curriculum. We want this thing that we want to have in our classrooms. And anytime that we focused on practice, on actually watching practice in action, whether it's through video, peer observations, expert demonstrations, school-wide learning results always improved. So think about some collective commitments, though, around shared beliefs to really articulate what those practices are. Here's an example. In my previous school, Mineral Point, we started with 3 beliefs about teaching the reading writing connection. So one is you can assess a child's phonemic awareness by examining his or her journal writing. So this was a shift, right? But we all agreed to it, and then we could all expect to see it. So it's not the coach having the leverage or the principal having to be the sole authority on what's really effective practice. It's we have these beliefs, and we're going to hold ourselves to it. We're going to hold ourselves accountable. So no one should have to do it alone, and shared beliefs is a way to do that. This was a set of collective commitments around classroom libraries. So we were seeing some resistance around it of having classroom libraries in our school, at least the way we wanted to see them. And I want you to take a moment to read through the 5 commitments. So we really spelled out what we wanted to see in every classroom. Take a minute to read through them and put in the chat, which number do you think had the most resistance from a few faculty members? Which one was the biggest stumbling block for a few of them? Oh, I'm seeing a pattern. 5. Throw in the chat. What do you think? What do you think that's about? It was 5, by the way. Yes. Betsy's saying control, control. Where does that control come from? What is that about? Yep. Organization by kids, not teachers. Teachers like to know where everything is. They're very comfortable. Yep. And I had one teacher just tell me, I'm not going to do it. So that was a interesting coaching conversation where I knew nothing, excuse me, nothing was going to come out of it that was going to be good. I didn't want to get into an argument. So I walked out. Later on, came back and just said, these are our commitments. How can you make this work within these commitments? And we finally landed on an appropriate way to do it. So, but yeah, how can I manage my materials if the kids are always changing the organization and displays? Yep, it's tough, right? Yes, and I think that brings up a good point. With book banning, student choice, that's only going to accelerate this control. So how can we support teachers to not give up control, but to share authority, right? How can we collaborate around what it means to be literate, right? And these are these opportunities to do that. Well, 8th consideration is just implement an instructional framework. So we talked about beliefs, and then we're getting into practices. So these can guide your instructional walks, your professional learning. It's all about creating common language. What are the terms that are going to promote student learning? What are those descriptions of those practices? I never call these best practices because I know that was, it was going to be met with resistance. These frameworks are flexible enough that anyone can fit their instruction within them. What I will note, though, is that what's omitted also matters. You're not going to find worksheets in this framework, okay? So a teacher's got to make a case, well, this is not a worksheet, this is an assessment, or this is a template to structure their writing. Oh, okay, that's different. That's a scaffold, right? But we would get to the point where actually we have video of these practices in action. We had slide decks of pictures from the classrooms of these practices in action, just to be crystal clear on what we were meaning. And then I would use those that framework to give teachers feedback once that trust was established. So in this one here, you can see is environment that was part of the framework. And it was just all of my notes along with just a comment that I really appreciated about that teacher and what they were doing at that time. This springboarded coaching conversations later on. And that's a consideration more near the end, is facilitate coaching conversations once that trust is established, once clarity is there around what's good instruction, then we can have a conversation. So these are two coaches that seat the three, and this is Jim and Molly. And I love Jim's posture. He epitomizes choice, right? Well, I'm hearing this, and I'm also hearing this. What do you think, Molly? Which option do you think would work for you? Always putting the authority as much as possible anyway with the client, with the coachee, with the teacher. Those notes I leave them there. And if I don't have time to meet with that person at the time, if they're busy teaching, I'll schedule a quick follow-up, no more than 5 minutes. So these don't have to be intensive, long coaching conversations. They can be very quick. And then finally, look at your data. What are you seeing with the framework from your instructional walks? Engage in this process with teacher leaders, your leadership team. Be open and humble. When I did this, this was from a couple of years ago, a few teachers said, well, you're not seeing, because ongoing assessment and student interaction and discussion were low, the blue. And they said, well, you're not coming in at the right times. I said, oh, okay. Well, tell me when to come in. And then we talked about schedules, and I did come in at some different times. It was still very low. And that informed a professional learning that we need to get kids empowered to be talking about text, both reading and writing. So the data spoke to that, but I was very open and honest and humble about what it all meant. So that's all I have for you. A lot of this content comes from my latest book from Corwin, Leading Like a Coach. It's a much briefer version of what I wrote in there, but this is the pathway I use as a principal, but I think it applies to anyone who's supporting teachers, and students in their learning. So I'd love to open it up for questions, and feel free to unmute. I know Brian might have had a few questions.
Matt, it's Sarah. Can you hear me?
Hey, Sarah, I can hear you.
Good. Hi. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about one of the things that I see a lot with staff is that they aren't necessarily behaving like the experts that they are. And I'm not quite sure where that breakdown in their confidence is. Teachers that have master's degrees or beyond and really are just making incredible professional decisions every single day, but still might defer to a less knowledgeable administrator or a parent or whatever the case may be. Like, talk a little bit about those conversations or what you see.
So I'm in several schools, and I see that too, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think part of it is the culture in the building. Do teachers have permission to veer from the script, right? Can they make an instructional decision? Can they be, as Matt Glover and Carl Anderson were saying we're book reading right now, can they be curriculum decision makers? Has that been made very explicit from administration and leaders? Obviously, you're not hearing that from the state. You're hearing you can only use these 4 resources because we don't want to make mistakes. And, there's nothing we can really do about that. But has leadership been really clear about that they have the capacity to not veer totally off from the curriculum? I understand that there's those expectations that can be there, but can they be responsive to kids? So one thing we can talk about is, instead of fidelity, the F word, we can talk about integrity. So we are, on the one hand, following the scope and sequence, because that's a board approved resource, correct? But also fidelity to the kid. So the curriculum and that kid that's, to me, is integrity. So I would look to integrity as a term that we used a lot when we implemented our resource. And I think just telling teachers too, like you were just saying, you have master's degrees, you have so much expertise. Please don't lose that. Please don't stop leaning on that. We need that. Curriculum's not going to teach the kids. You are. So I don't think they can hear that enough. Did that answer the question, Sarah?
Yeah, that actually is really helpful because I
Yeah.
think sometimes there are mixed messages from, administration versus curriculum instruction versus the state versus, what parents want. And um, that actually did give me a few things to think about and take
Okay.
back. So, thank
And just to add one more thing to it too, the principal might think like, yeah, you can do this, but I learned kind of very probably too slowly. Like I had to be very explicit with them. Like I had to use the word permission because the teacher was like, she had two other teachers who were saying, nope, stick with this, resource. Like it's the Ten Commandments. And I said, do you need permission to hear from it? And she's like, yes, I need to know from you in language that I can do this. And so um, that's something that an administrator might need to hear.
Matt, I just want to pick up on that. This is Deborah.
Hey,
I,
Deborah.
I'm in the great position of being a volunteer these days. It's the
Mhm.
most liberating, wonderful portion of my career because I, you know, I don't have to worry about being fired or being held to mandates. But that giving up permission to be responsive to children, to teach literacy comprehensively and responsibly, I think that in a lot of the situations that I know about right now, teachers aren't feeling permission to veer from not only the program, but from whole group instruction of the program. And I'm working with 5 students right now individually, and I hear teachers being afraid to do the things that the children I am working with need because it's different from what's being taught whole group in that moment from a mandated curricula or program. So how can a coach help in situations like that? How what can the system do to help this situation? Because people are perceiving Act 20 and the approved list as mandates and are kind of putting that on groups of students in a very lockstep, restrictive manner. And I just think it's really worrying. And teachers are very hesitant to rock the boat right now.
Yeah. And I probably misspoke, the veering that can be construed as, yeah, we're going off script and we're going, we're not even teaching the literacy curriculum at all. And everyone has their own beliefs about, resources just in themselves. But the reality is, districts, they're having to purchase these commercial programs, and some of them can be very good, used responsibly. So I would just really differentiate between being responsive versus veering, because that invites its own problems, right? I imagine everyone here, if I had Deb Cromer, and all of you in classrooms teaching the kids, we wouldn't need literacy curriculum, resources like they might in others' classrooms. So thinking about, like, for example, new teachers. I mean, they would probably welcome a high quality instructional resource because it's the starting point. So that's maybe a way to think about it, is how can you be responsive to the kids without veering too far? One thing we talked about in my last school was really teach less and learn more. Teach less, learn more. So, for example, if you look in the teacher's manual, if it says 15 to 45 minutes for foundational skills, teach 15 minutes, because that means you've now got 30 minutes, up to 30 minutes for independent reading and writing, like you were saying, Deb, whole group instruction. So find ways to be what Atul Gawande talks about is a positive deviant. Like, you're staying within the system, right? You can't just do whatever you want, but how can you find third ways to meet your kids' needs while also staying You're not going out of orbit out of the system. And if some teachers are not, doing that, they're really sticking with the script, it comes back to, I think, some of those coaching conversations about building trust, and your position, it can be envious, but it also can be very powerful, Deb, too, because you have nothing, you can have those conversations, I guess, without worry as much about retrieval. So, but I would recommend a book here. I have a few always on the stack. The book Cognitive Capital. So you've got like the cognitive coaching book, which is like £2. This one's a very brief. It's like barely 100 pages, but it talks about all the coaching skills that they describe in that resource, in that book. So really leveraging coaching strategies such as paraphrasing, posing questions, pausing, cognitive capital. I'll put it in the chat at time. And it's by Costa and Garmson. Very quick read. I'm being aware of your time. Did I answer your question, Deborah?
Yeah, Matt, I think that idea of saying, being responsive rather than veering, I think that's a nice way to phrase it. I mean, I am in the position, I can say no. When someone
Right.
asked me, said that the program was directing them to teach open and closed syllables to first graders at the beginning of the year.
Mhm.
And could I work on it with my student? And I said, no, that's not what she needs right now, that I wouldn't be responsive to her because she's not at that point where that's useful to her.
Mhm.
So I can say no, but
Right.
but I think phrasing it as, being responsive, I need to be responsive to what, and it goes back to something you said too, about spending that time actually teaching. But I think one of the other key pieces of this is assessment, and
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
idea of assessment is sitting alongside, not testing, but sitting alongside students as they're reading and writing so that we can notice and name what
Yep.
they do know and what they need next. And that's
Yep.
what guides our responsive teaching. So
Yep.
thank you, Matt,
That's
for helping us
nope.
with that.
No, and that's absolutely right. Like anytime we want to be responsive, we really should have data to support. We need to go in this direction because boom. And then if they say, well, no, well, what data do you have, right? To say that. And so I think just really being a coach for each other, like a culture of coaching versus being a consultant or and you're good about this, Deb, and of just really having conversations of just tell me more about that, and even though we're in our heads, we're thinking, you're totally wrong. Andrea asked, could you talk a little bit more about the 3 types of coaching that were on one of your slides? Yes, and I apologize, when I was going through them, I realized I was missing that. So let me just bring it up real quickly. I would have to add another slide if I were to do this again. So facilitative coaching is very much cognitive coaching. It's how I understand it. It is you are supporting the client, the teacher's capacity to think. So you're paraphrasing, you're posing questions, you're pausing, you're not, you have the client in the driver's seat. They are totally in charge of where they want to go. They're doing all the goal setting. If you were to give any ideas, you would ask permission, or they would say, I don't want you to coach me right now. I want you to tell me what to do. Okay. And even then you got to be careful, but it's all about trusting teachers. And it's similar to conferring with kids, right? With readers and writers. We're supporting their capacity, not just to learn how to read, but how to be a reader, right? That's the art of teaching readers, is giving them that chance to figure it out and solve their own problems. And that's a long-term view. Directive coaching is do this, not that, which is very much what you're seeing with the science of reading, right? Don't do 3 cueing. Definitely do synthetic phonics, even though, we know that doesn't necessarily work. And then dialogical coaching is kind of in the middle, where think of it more like PLCs, teams, where we're just having a conversation. We're on an even playing field, and that can be a lot of fun. But we're trading ideas. We're back and forth. It's very collaborative. So there's three types of coaching, and I would even argue that directive coaching is not even really coaching. It's more consulting, mentoring. You are in a higher position of authority. So if you can almost think of it like a seesaw, where directive coaching, the coach is up top, dialogical coaching, we're kind of balanced in the middle, and facilitative, we're supporting that client to solve their own problems. And I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other, especially if you've got some short-term things that we do actually need to address if a teacher is really struggling. But for the most part, the majority of the time, facilitative or dialogical coaching is, for me, is the default. So you're welcome. I didn't say this enough, but when I came into school, into education, I was not strong in literacy. I didn't have a lot of background knowledge, and so I had to quickly learn and build my own capacity in terms of knowing literacy. Two books that have recently come out that I would highly recommend. First is Teaching Readers, Not Reading by Peter Afflerbach. I'm not saying you need like an arsenal of sound bites and knowledge, but this book is kind of the antidote to a very limited view of this, the science of reading. Peter Afflerbach just, he brings the receipts and talks about all the ways that we teach readers beyond just skills and strategies. So he doesn't say we can't teach skills and strategies, but he says if that's all you're ever doing, you're not really teaching readers, right? It's so-called, context-based and cultural-based. And one more book I'll recommend too is The Heart-Centered Teacher. It's almost like part memoirs from Regie Routman, but a wonderful book about really what we're talking about here is coaching people and being in relation to people. This is not something that comes easily to me. I tend to be more closed up a little bit and not very demonstrative with my feelings. It's something I'm working on, but it just finds that real nice sweet spot between literacy and humanity, I guess. So those are three books. And then Deborah mentioned that Choice Words is coming out, a second edition. Yeah, it's already on my review list. It's going to be fantastic. It's one of those books that you almost want to reread every couple of years. So now you get a chance to revisit it. So other questions or other insights? Brian, you're on mute. I don't know if you're talking.
There, okay, we should be good. The iPad, for some reason, is doing that. I don't know why. Anyways, I'm gonna step it back just a second. And I was an instructional coach, or an instructional coach. But if there are beginning teachers that are out there, and this is kind of the first presentation that they've seen on this, and maybe they're interested in becoming a literacy coach or an instructional coach, what would be your advice? First of all, what are some of the things they need to do to make that happen? And then what would be your advice to make that happen?
Just so I understand, Brian, if they're interested in becoming a coach,
right?
Okay, what would be the thing to do?
Let's say they're kind of a beginning teacher, and this is kind of the first they've seen on this. And
yeah.
Any good classes they should take might be a part of your thought process.
Any class, yeah. I'll tell you, the class I took that was so helpful was through Edgewood College instructional coaching, but it was based on the work of cognitive coaching. So I know out of Milwaukee they have some training in cognitive coaching. I would recommend doing that. It's pretty intensive, but was really a wonderful training for me, and it really was the impetus for this book. That book, and then Read Write Lead by Regie Routman. So the cognitive coaching training I would highly recommend. And I would just read, literature, kind of come into it like there are different philosophies on coaching. And, you know this too, Brian, I'm sure is, you almost have to wear different hats depending on the situation you're in, it's what that person needs. And it's really being responsive as a coach. So just reading the different philosophies, I think, read Jim Knight, but also read Art Costa, find some like thinner literature, even like educational leadership has a lot of nice articles that aren't going to, take up hours of your time. So just, I think, study it and read it. And then I would invite someone to come and coach you as a teacher. And the best coaches, I think, are very coachable. If they're willing to learn, that is a sign that they're going to be a pretty good coach. Because that's what coaching for me is all about, is what can I learn from the situation and how can I best support that person? Because without that understanding of where they're at and what they need, I'm just not going to be very effective. So what would you add to that, Brian?
I think the openness and being coachable. I mean, when you started talking about that, I'm reflecting back to my first year of being teaching literacy at 8th grade, and I've always told people someone should have grabbed me by the neck and threw me out of the classroom. I mean, I realized that I needed to grow and really started looking at different ways to grow. And I think if you reach that point of that acceptance, then you can be better all around on both spectrums. Yeah, I agree on that.
Yeah. I think too, going in not wanting to fix, that was a issue I had going into administration. I have all these great ideas. I've been reading Chris Devani, I've been reading, Reed Robin, I've been reading Stephanie Harvey. I'm going to come in and be a principal and I'm going to institute all these ideas. And you can imagine how that went. Not so well. So after that first year I had as a principal, I had just pages of complaints, and I realized this isn't the way it's going to work. I can't evaluate our way to effectiveness school-wide. I have to operate more as a coach. So I think too, you can coach anyone at any time. I mean, I will coach my kids, I'll coach my wife. I mean, once you get really good at it, and I would again really emphasize getting some training in coaching. I think that's imperative. There are some, it is a learned skill, but then you can kind of practice it, all the time. Even when you're at a counter at a Starbucks or something, things are a little difficult. You can come back to those skills. It's almost a way to practice mindfulness if you're into that. So is the main focus when coaching on strengthening instructional strategies, or does it go bigger than that depending on the person you're working with? That's a good question. And from Keely, and what I would say to that is, especially now as a systems coach, I'm finding challenges that teachers are experiencing do go up the ladder, right? So we talk about like what I think Deborah was saying of teachers don't know if they have permission or not to teach responsibly. They feel like they just need to teach from the script. So almost having a system lens of like really just determining, is this something that was it in the zone of control for that teacher, or is there something more systemic going on, right? So then I might be doing some rounds and getting curious, where else is this happening? Who else feels this way? And if I have half the culture, half the faculty saying this kind of the same theme, I showed you that data before about lack of discussion, lack of student involvement. I had data to support that. And then I could go to the leadership team and say, hey, we need to make a change professionally. We need to focus on student discussion. Same thing here, Keely, if you're seeing some obstacles that are happening more school-wide, it's likely a systems issue that then we have to have a conversation with leaders. So but that's a great question. Is there a specific thing you're seeing that might be bigger, that's impacting more than one person? And you don't have to share, but I'm just curious.
I don't know. There's things I notice moving around the building and working with different groups of people, a lot of PLCs. I think I I don't know if I realized it till you were speaking tonight. I thought, I think I've always thought instructional coaching as a focus on the instructional strategies, but in listening tonight, I think it's everything. It's more than that.
Yeah.
It's just helping a teacher be successful and what that means for them to give access to their students to be successful,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, no, I think you said it very well. It's helping them be successful, but are we dealing with the symptoms or more, are there some root causes happening here? And sometimes we end up playing whack-a-mole, right? Like we're seeing all these
Mhm.
issues and we're just in fix it mode and we're not stepping back and say, okay, wait a minute, what's really going on here? And that's why school-wide data can be really important. I think in terms of equity too, I love this definition of equity. I'm going to try to put it in the chat, but it's all about reducing obstacles, increasing supports, and meeting people where they are at. And that's not from me. That's from a superintendent, Shante Garrett in North Carolina. But I asked her one time, what's equity to you? And she listed these three things. And I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. So I'm always thinking about these three things as a systems, as an equity coach. Where these are my three entry points, right? And then, what does this person need? So I can still help the teacher solve some of their immediate problems, but I'm also paying attention to, are there some systems things going on here that I don't want to keep solving the same problem over and over and over, right? So, and I keep coming back to me. I don't want to help the client keep revisiting the same problem over and over. So, other questions?
I think Kathy popped one up on there.
See, Keely had,
Keely.
yeah, I think I answered that question.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll just put one more thing out there and we can certainly close early if you want. I know, especially Brian and here in the birds chirping, I'm sure he'd love to be present with his awesome surroundings. I think, when I left the principalship and I left the teaching, I had this kind of guilt. Oh, I'm no longer in the classroom. Oh, I'm no longer in the office. And sometimes that guilt can lead to, well, why don't you sub in this classroom, right? Because we're short subs. And say, okay, I will do that because that's what I need to do to help out. And I'm not saying you should never do that, but I would just, as an 11th consideration, really define what your values and goals are for your position and hold tight to those values. If you believe, I want to be committed as a coach, then that means having to say and having some boundaries of saying, I'm not going to go in the classroom every time we don't have a sub. My job is really important. And we need coaches more than ever because, often teachers can't go to administration because it is what it is. And so you are that person for them to keep them in the profession, to keep them grounded and just remind them about the work and what we're really here about. Because it continues to be tough. So whether you're a formal coach or an informal coach, your positions are really important. Take them seriously and stick with it because the teachers and their leaders need it too. Really try to coach up. I had a wonderful instructional coach when I was a principal who was just really good at helping me see things, would just get me out of my own head. I get caught up in stuff and, I just get sucked into some of the emotions of it. And so be that person for everyone else. So thank you.
And I think you alluded to a good point that I found was when I stepped out and stepped into that role. For me, it was part-time. I was still doing instruction, but 1 or 2 periods a day, I was being a coach. And the things that I learned, it actually taking on that role and capacity, I think made me a stronger teacher also. Because I learned a lot too, along the way. So don't be afraid to move, as you said, Matt. Take on those responsibility type things.
Yeah.
Any other quick questions for Matt?
Yep, this is Keely again. Another quick question.
Okay.
Um, Interesting to hear you say that it's an important role, because how do you share with other teachers that it's an important role and that it's actually going to be helpful for them? Because sometimes there's that resistance piece.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, you can really start with where you're welcome. I think in the beginning, when you want to do more formal coaching, I would really advocate for any coach to get into every classroom and just do lots of touch points. Hey, how you doing? Anything I can do for you? I know of one coach who just would come in to build that trust, would come in and help teachers wipe their desks, help the teacher wipe their desk for a couple of minutes and just chat them up. And it took them months until they cracked that window, right, to get them to open up. But she kept coming in every day for a couple minutes and just checked in. And so I guess just don't give up on them. I would come back to like the newsletter idea and collecting data. That was something as a principal I encouraged my coach to do, is really not toot your own horn, but really be systematic about collecting data and then sharing those wins, right? For people to see the impact, because they do kind of question like, well, I don't see them teaching. And then someone who's, just gets envious about your position. Well, you're not in the classroom, you're not in the trenches. And it's not about you, it's about them. But having some real data in terms of not necessarily even, hey, we knocked it out of the park, but hey, here's what we learned, like just doing very small experiments. As a principal, and a coach, I mean, the first experiment I did with our librarian was just placing more complex text next to like the Dave Pilkey stuff, right? Like there's nothing wrong with the Dave Pilkey stuff, but that's all the kids were doing. And so we just paired text like in the same genre with one more complex than the next. And we really didn't get a ton of specific outcomes, but just the fact that we did it and then we shared about it. And so here's what we learned. So really celebrating the teacher's efforts to try things, but being really good about communicating it from a school level, but also at a board level. So my newsletter I sent to everyone in the school, but I also sent it to all the school board members and my superintendent once a week, so they could see the good work we were doing. And it was never about me, it was always about, here's what I saw, and I think as a coach, you can take that same approach. And it can be just very short, just, hey, here's an image and here's a little anecdote, here's what I learned. I did keep like a checklist just to make sure I wasn't like favoring certain people, because I'm like anyone, I went to places where I felt welcome to. So I had to be real careful about making sure I was celebrating everyone at some point. So does that answer the question, Keely?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Because it's kind of a newish role, and
Yep.
figuring it out. Yeah, thank you.
We're reading a book called What Happened to You, about like trauma and resilience. And it's Bruce Perry. He wrote it with Oprah Winfrey, but they talk about, and that's not what I'm saying. The situation here is they went through trauma, but they said it took 10 to 12 times of repeated conversations with a child, with a client, for them to even just open up about something, And what you're doing is you're teaching the brain, again, I'm not a neurologist, but it's teaching the brain that you're safe, just by repeatedly coming to them and just having casual conversations. So that's something I didn't do enough. Again, that's not my default personality. I'm not a bubbly person. I'm not a gregarious, warm person. So I really had to work on that. But over time and just doing it repeatedly, it does signal to them that they can have confidence in you. They can trust that you're not going to blast them, that you're going to listen to them, that, you're a safe person.
Matt, this is Deborah again. One of the things you said reminded me of when I was a young teacher. I think it was like my second or third year teaching. We had a new principal, and he would have to do, visits for evaluations, but he made a practice right from the beginning of asking us when would be a good time to schedule a visit, just
Oh,
to
yeah.
come in our rooms. And he would always say, is there something you would like me to pay attention to? Is there something you'd like feedback on? Is there something, where would you like me to sit? I mean, he had a whole slew of questions that he would ask. And I remember, say, well, this is what I'm trying. I would really like it if you
Yeah.
observed me doing this and gave me this kind of feedback. And right from the get-go, I felt comfortable with him, and he became a partner in my classroom and in my
Mhm.
growth as a teacher. But with the kids, viewed him as a co-learner, and he would come in and share. He started wanting to share some of his writing because it was eighth grade and we were doing writing and reading. And he would come in and share some of his writing, and even ask me to hold a writing conference with him in front of the kids. So, but it was all based on his questions to me about what I wanted, what I felt was beneficial. And I hadn't thought about that in a long time until you said some of those things. So thank you for
Yeah.
that reminder.
No, and you're talking about facilitative coaching, right? It's such a great example of the principal understood that positionally they were in a position of authority, which is okay. But that makes it very difficult to have, coaching conversations. So anything that we can do as leaders, whether it's positional or as coaches, just, to lower the power differential or close the power differential so that they feel like they have autonomy and agency. It's so good to do that when you can. So, and then, talk a lot about coaching, like it's all about talking, but so much of coaching is how we operate, right? And it's, hey, I need some feedback on this writing is such a perfect example of conveying the implicit message that I am a learner just like you, and being vulnerable, I think is awesome. Great example, Deb. Any other questions?
Well, once again, Matt, thank you very much. This was extremely informative, and it was extremely good.